In the previous episode, the group was striving to fulfill the second law of the dungeon. A young hunter was tragically crushed by a massive god statue, which then proceeded to ruthlessly squash the other hunters as if they were mere insects. Mr. Park suffered a grim fate, being sliced in half. Ultimately, the surviving hunters made a frantic dash toward the statues, armed with musical instruments. Among them, Jin Wu was seen alongside Ju-hee, desperately rushing towards one of the statues with an instrument in hand. He then began running hard, so hard that his heart might explode. His back was already soaked through in sweat. Why? Why isn't it working? Jin Woo's resentful glare landed on the stone statue in front of him. The statue holding a drum showed no signs of moving at all. The god statue closed in with frightening speed. He was practically on the other side of the chamber from the damn thing, yet the distance between the two shortened in no time at all.
Could it be that the statue won't play because there are two people here? Me and Miss Jinwoo?
He couldn't think of anything else. Why? Because other statues were playing music just fine as soon a hunter stood in front of it. There is no time to think anymore. Jin Wu put Ju-hee down and got ready to run to somewhere else. Still terrified out of her mind, Ju-hee clung onto Jin Woo's sleeve. Jin Wu calmly whispered in her ear.
We'll both die if we stay together.
Tears began forming on Ju-hee's eyes. Her fingers trembled as they held onto his clothes. Unfortunately, there was no time to explain to her in detail. Jin Wu carefully pried her hand away and began running in the opposite direction as hard as he could. When he glanced back, the statue behind Ju-hee began beating its drum in a slow but steady rhythm. There was only one thing remaining now, to run to the other statue without getting killed. Only Jin Wu hadn't received the protection of the music-playing statues. Quite obviously, the rage of the god statue was solely directed to Jin Wu and him alone. Jin Wu did his best to avoid the foot of the thing that rivaled a building in size and crossed the room in a hurry. He fell and rolled around, but still, he somehow managed to avoid getting flattened by the god statue's foot. He might only have been a rank E, but he was still a close combat type hunter, so his physique came in handy in situations like this.
Just a little bit further. A bit more.
Jin Wu kept an eye out on the god statue's movements and ran even harder. His speed increased. And when the distance remaining between him and the stone statue was mere a dozen feet.
No, that's the wrong one.
Jin Wu had been paying attention to the god statue only. He was stunned by the shout and hurriedly turned his head to take a look at his front.
It's not a statue with an instrument?
He belatedly realized that the thing that looked like a musical instrument from afar was actually a shield, instead. And sure enough, the statue mercilessly stabbed down with its shield. Jin Wu hurriedly threw himself to the side. Ju-hee screamed. Jin Wu rolled on the ground, and when he came to a stop, he raised his head to see the god statue standing right in front of his nose.
It's one thing after another.
His forehead must have been torn from him rolling on the ground, because blood was flowing down and blurred his vision. His view was restricted and he couldn't look too far away. Jin Wu quickly searched around his vicinity.
An instrument. An instrument.
However, no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't see a single statue holding an instrument nearby. Meanwhile, the god statue raised its leg over Jin Wu's position. Jin Wu threw himself again and somehow avoided the foot of the statue again. But he had reached his limit. A powerful dizziness was assaulting him, and for some reason, he couldn't even balance himself. If there was a real god, he thought that he'd start praying right about now. It was then, Jin Wu spotted a stone statue that held neither a weapon or a musical instrument.
Is that?
Jin Wu decided to bet everything on that statue. He crawled on the ground and arrived in front of the statue in question. A beautiful and otherworldly voice came out. The lips of the stone statue holding a book moved, and whenever they did, a divine song flowed out and filled the interior of the massive chamber. The crumpled expression of the god statue slowly reverted back to the emotionless state. Soon, all those horrifyingly contorted facial muscles of the statue smoothed out. When the song of the stone statues came to its eventual end, the god statue turned around. Then, just how other stone statues had done until now, it returned to its throne and settled down as if things that happened until now were nothing but a lie. The noise of the god statue sitting down on the throne resounded throughout the chamber.
Barely made it.
A thin smile formed on Jinwoo's lips. Meanwhile, Jinwoo began running from her position at the far end of the chamber.
Mr. Jin Wu!
Knelt down next to him as tears streamed down on her face.
What can I do? What am I supposed to?
And activated her healing magic. However, nothing seemed to improve. The dispersed hunters gathered around Jinwoo one by one. Every single one of them carried a dark expression.
What? Mr. Jin Wu!
Why was everyone acting like this? Jinwoo's lips bobbled up and down. He wanted to ask what was going on, but he couldn't really summon forth his own voice. Sensing that he had no choice, he tried to prop himself up. Then, he noticed the pool of blood around his lower torso. Only then did he belatedly realize the change to his body. Below his right knee was gone. Jinwoo's eyes reflexively shifted toward the stone statue holding the shield. He then saw the trail of blood clearly visible on the end of the shield. And the rest of his right leg was just below that. Drops of blood started falling from Jinwoo's nose. That was the sign of her reaching the limits of her physical stamina. The healing magic from a rank B healer was unable to recover missing limbs. Meaning, what she was doing was basically pouring water into a broken jug. Her stamina rapidly bottomed out in the end.
It's fine now. Miss Jinwoo. You can stop.
I'm going to heal you. I'll fix you as good as new.
Terrible expressions. Out of the 17 who initially entered this chamber, only 6 remained now. And from this group of 6, 2 of them had suffered horrible, grievous wounds. Song had lost his arm, while Jinwoo lost his leg. They might have survived, but none of them felt like rejoicing at the moment. It was then, yet another strange noise rocked the chamber. The middle of the temple, where that strange magic formation could be found, suddenly rose up above the ground. Jinwoo inwardly thought that it had finally come.
Prove your piety, is it?
He already had a rough idea as to what those words could mean. The circular magic formation in the center of the temple began rising up noisily and only stopped after reaching the height of a couple of steps.
An altar.
Hunters displayed alert reactions as soon as Jinwoo muttered out. An altar. He just said it's an altar. The person who had rescued them from the 2 preceding crises was not some high-ranked hunter, but ranky Jinwoo, who used to be the butt of their jokes most of the time. If it weren't for Mr. Song, all of us would have been. Hunters were thinking this exact same thought. Under the current circumstances, Jinwoo's words were their lifeline. And now, that Jinwoo had muttered out a word, altar. Kim always was quick on the uptake, and so, he caught on to the meaning first before anyone else had the chance to do so.
I get it now. I see how it is.
On his hips. Now originally, this weapon would be used to cut various monsters down. But for now, it'd have to be utilized for a different purpose altogether.
Even if I'm a dumb bastard, I can more or less get what you're trying to say here.
Looking at the sharp, coldly gleaming blade. Oi, Mr. Kim. Why are you pulling your sword out like that? Why don't we talk about this first? Let's talk first. The highest-ranked member among the group, Rank C Hunter Song, was heavily injured, meaning there was no one here that could potentially stop Kim, who boasted a pretty powerful set of skills himself even within the D rank. Kim pointed towards the altar with his sword.
The final law, prove your piety. And there's an altar appearing out of nowhere in the middle of this place.
To Jinwoo.
So, are we supposed to offer up a sacrifice? Mr. Song?
That was what the youth thought as well. One of the surviving 6 had to act as a sacrifice. That's what the last law probably meant. Jinwoo came to this conclusion. He sensed more disturbance and raised his head, and realized that the eyes of Mr. Kim as he approached closer did not look friendly at all.
You, young man, don't say anything and be still. Just who was it that dragged us to this place? Wasn't it this guy? Yes, it was Mr. Song. So, don't you think it's only right for Mr. Song to take the ultimate responsibility?
Jinwoo looked at Song in disbelief. Song wordlessly shook his head. His eyes were pleading with Jin Wu, asking the youth to not say anything else. Of course, Jin Wu had lots of things to say, but he kept them down for now. Song slowly raised his body up.
What Mr. Kim said is right. I should take the blame for today.
Kim used the tip of his sword to point towards the altar.
If you get it now, then let's get going already. Over 10 people died here because of you, old man.
To be Mr. Park, a personal friend to Mr. Kim, exploring the dual dungeon was decided with the vote involving everyone, but Kim had already erased that memory off his head after losing much of his reasoning. Mr. Song spoke to Kim.
I'd like to walk on my own volition, so can you put the sword away?
How can I trust you, old man? Stop wasting time and start moving already.
Breath and walked towards the altar. Kim pointed his sword at the older man's back and followed on afterwards. Jin Wu bit his lower lip while watching the two men walk away.
This isn't the fault of Mr. Song.
More than half of the group agreed to do it together. Just because things had gone south, blaming Song for everything was simply too cowardly, he thought. Jin Wu unfortunately did not possess enough strength to stop Kim here. Kim, thought to be one of the best among the rank D, and Song Jin Wu, easily the worst of the rank E. The difference in their strengths was all too clear for him to see. Not only that, Jin Wu had even lost a leg. If he tried to confront Kim as he was now, there was a chance that him and even Ju Hui, who had been focusing solely on healing him, could meet with disaster. Jin Wu squeezed his eyes shut. He never hated his own powerlessness as much as he did today. In the meantime, Song had stepped up on the raised altar. Suddenly, a red flame lit up near the outer perimeter of the altar as soon as he did. Everyone nervously swallowed their saliva and observed the unfolding situation carefully. However, nothing else happened. Just a single flame came to life, and that was it. They waited for a while, but there was no visible change at all. Not only Kim, but everyone else got flustered by this situation. Kim quickly turned his head and spoke to Jin Wu.
Look here, Mr. Song. This wasn't it.
Jin Wu also shook his head. He too thought that once a person chosen as the sacrifice stepped up on the altar, the third law of approve one's piety would be completed.
It's not about offering up a sacrifice?
If so, then it was not necessarily bad news. If the law was not about sacrifices, then it meant Mr. Song could still saved. Jin Wu's expression brightened somewhat. He sweated bucket loads as he tried to stand up, and two hunters nearby quickly lent their assistance.
Please take me closer to the altar so I can study it.
Mr. Jin Wu, your injuries are. Ju Hui also got up from her spot to follow after Jin Wu. Her complexion was rather pale after expending too much of her magical energy. But because she had worked so hard, Jin Wu's blood loss had been temporarily halted and the pain he felt was reduced to a barely noticeable degree.
I gotta hurry up.
The current condition of Ju Hui, Kim's boiling rage, Song's injuries, and the frightened hunters, he didn't have a lot of time here. Jin Wu eventually arrived at the altar with the help from other hunters.
Let's climb up on the altar.
The two hunters flinched from his statement, but they trusted Jin Wu and stepped up. Then, 3 more flames lit up. Right away, Jin Wu's eyes gleamed brightly.
It's the same number as the people on the altar.
Mr. Song and Jin Wu, plus 2 others who helped the youth. Indeed, the flames lit up to match the number of people standing on the altar. And it kind of looked like that these 4 flames were drawing a circle outside the altar.
If I take into consideration the space between the flames, 2 more will complete the circle.
It seemed that all the remaining people had to climb up on the altar for something, anything, to get started. Jin Wu turned his head to ask Song.
If we wait here, do you think other hunters will come to rescue us?
Song shook his head.
Today is the 7th day since the gate showed up. These things will start moving first before the help arrives. Because it's a gate rank D, I see that it's been left alone for far too long. Well, that's how the association operates, isn't it?
The real meaning of a raid was to kill the dungeon's boss monster and therefore close the gate before that happened. When failing to do so, the monsters trapped in the dungeons would be set free from the dungeon and they would be able to roam the outside world. Jin Wu looked behind him. The giant god statue was still looking down on them with an overbearing, arrogant expression from its throne.
If that thing manages to go outside, then
The ensuing chaos would be unimaginable. Of course, before that happened, hunters coming to this chamber to rescue them would all be killed by the statues first. He was now sure of the fact that they could not wait here forever. Jinwoo called out to Juhui and Kim.
Both of you climb up.
Juhui stepped up on the altar first. The hesitant Kim also followed suit soon afterwards. 2 more flames lit up and the circle was now complete. And then, hunters were grandly stunned by what happened next. What the hell? What's going on here? As Jinwoo had suspected, yet another change took place.
It's coming.
From the outermost edge of the altar, small blue flames floated upwards and began drawing a circle of their own as well. There looked to be at least 30 of these blue flames, placed real tightly next to each other.
34, 35, 36.
Jinwoo quickly counted them all as the blue flames completed the circle and he realized that there were 36 of them. The 6 red flames that lit up to match the number of people. And the 36 blue flames that appeared outside them. What could be the significance behind that number? It was then. Without a warning, the resolutely shut door suddenly opened up wide. Hunters reflexively flinched. They all wanted so bad to run towards the wide-open doorway, but having seen the final moments of the choirboy hunter, they found it hard to take the first step. If one tried to be the first, just who knew what might happen to them? Everyone's gaze fixed on Jinwoo as if to demand an answer from him. However, Jinwoo's lips remained tightly shut. He couldn't come up with a guess at the moment. He didn't know whether the open door was a trap, or they were now allowed to go out after they upheld the final law successfully. Too bad for him. Just as everyone was looking at Jinwoo, a horrifying noise filled up the entire chamber.
The heads of all 6 hunters quickly snapped around to look. What was that? It's coming closer. Those damn things are all moving now. Hunters' breathing quickened in an instant. The stone statues that had only moved when a person got near were now several steps closer to the group. Jinwoo only needed a short moment to figure out what happened, of course.
No, the statues didn't move. It's the plinths below them that moved.
That horrifying screech from earlier on most likely came from the plinths beneath the statues grating against the stone floor.
They are not moving anymore.
Kim wiped the droplets of sweat on his forehead as he spoke. While everyone was still staring at the statues, Jinwoo's focus was on the blue flames. They had been going out one by one, and 3 of them had flickered out of existence already. Hearing that screech, someone cried out. Well, what was that? Where did it come from? Jinwoo quickly raised his head. The noise had come from his general direction. The stone statues facing him had moved a little bit closer.
Why only my side?
Was it because he looked at somewhere else briefly? In order to confirm, Jinwoo closed his eyes. The noise resounded out again. As soon as he opened his eyes, the noise stopped. What the fuck is going on here? What are we supposed to do about this? Jinwoo quickly shouted at others.
Don't take your eyes off the statues, no matter what.
When he thought about it, he realized that the statues first began moving closer to the group when others were busy looking at him.
They creep closer when we are not looking at them.
It was right then, another blue flame disappeared. However, there was still no discernible change to either the group or the statues.
Could it be?
Cautiously raising his arm, Jinwoo did his best not to take his eyes off the statues while checking the time with his wristwatch.
As I thought.
At an interval of 1 minute, a blue flame was being extinguished. The blue flames are the timer. It was quite likely that one of the main points of the 3rd law was to stay within the altar until all 36 blue flames died out. In other words, as long as everyone was keeping close watch on the statues, they'd be safe. It was quite possible that no one had to die at this final huddle. Wanting to be more accurate about the remaining time, Jinwoo began recounting the number of blue flames once more.
There are 30 remaining.
They only needed to endure 30 more minutes. Unfortunately, Jinwoo made a huge mistake just then. While he was counting the number of blue flames, his eyes wandered away for a brief moment, and that resulted in the statues creeping closer. The man standing on the opposite side screamed and ran towards the door. He simply couldn't hold on any longer as the horrifying screeching noise coming from his back frightened him so much. As soon as he left the altar, one of the red flames disappeared. Jin Wu cried out urgently. However, the man running as if he had gone crazy escaped through the open doorway without meeting a grisly fate, which took everyone by surprise. What the hell? Mr. Song. What's going on? That guy made it out alive. Kim shouted out, flustered. Jin Wu was standing with his back to the doorway so he couldn't really tell what was going on.
Did something change?
The door. The door has closed just a little. The door's closing? No. After that guy left, the door moved a little bit, but then stopped. Jin Wu then recalled one of the red flames disappearing as soon as that man left the altar. He immediately felt his heart go cold. One of the questions that he couldn't quite figure out until now as he stood on top of this altar finally had an answer. How could standing on an altar be a proof of one's piety? Indeed, he now had the answer to this quandary. And that answer was probably the worst one for Jin Wu, who had only one leg now and needed others' help just to keep his balance. That open doorway was a trap. A false hope right in front of one's eyes. If people saw the open door and climbed off the altar at the same time, the red flames would have gone out and the doorway would be closed shut again. And then, the banquet of raining blood and screams would inevitably follow next. On the other hand, the altar was the proverbial promised land. If each one did what they had to do in their positions until the timer ran out, then their survival would be guaranteed. So, it was between the false hope right in front of one's eyes, or the unseen promise of salvation. The third law was a test to see if one could defend one's position without falling into the sweet temptation over yonder while constantly being under the encroaching threat of death. However, two flies in the ointment happened in this situation. The first one was Jin Wu. Originally, the remaining group of people would have ran straight for the open door, but they stopped first to listen to what Jin Wu had to say, and that helped them avoid the trap being sprung in the first place.
We got lucky there.
Indeed, that had to be the only explanation. Such a thing was only possible because Jin Wu managed to figure out the first two laws all by himself and earned the trust of others. Unfortunately for him, the second fly also happened, something he didn't foresee. A deserter had appeared among their midst. How would human beings react and there was a hope of survival right in front of their eyes? It was way too obvious. The man helping Jin Wu up abandoned the youth and bolted as well. Song hurriedly reached out and propped Jin Wu up from his back. When that man left the altar, yet another red flame disappeared and as expected, the door closed a little bit more. Kim dazedly pointed at the second deserter, but just like the first person to abandon them, he too safely escaped past the doorway. Jin Wu confirmed the number of remaining red flames and shouted out.
We must not move. Any more than this, then it'll be the end.
Front, back, left, and right. In order to secure all four directions, 4 people were the bare minimum required. Jin Wu himself, Ju Hui, Mr. Song and finally, Mr. Kim. A single person leaving now would result in a gap within the field of vision. Kim wiped the sweat off his forehead and asked urgently.
Mr. Song, just what is going on here? Explain it to me properly.
We'll make it as long as we wait here. Only until all the blue flames are extinguished.
Jin Wu spat out everything he had deduced so far. Kim nodded his head as his ears perked up. Jin Wu quickly ended his explanation and added one more thing at the end.
Remember, everyone here can get out of here alive.
The laws of this chamber always left open a path for one's survival. The final law would not deviate from that. Jin Wu was certain of no one else needing to die as long as the remaining people trusted each other. Too bad, Kim's thoughts were quite different from the youth's. The older hunter asked hesitantly.
Look here, Mr. Song, you could be right on this one, but could the door close shut instead when the timer runs out?
Jin Wu couldn't answer that one. He came to his conclusion after considering several variables, but until the result was in, he couldn't be 100% certain of anything. However, what Kim wanted was a definite assurance. Rather than an uncertain promise of everyone's survival, the definite survival of his own self had proved to be far more alluring in the end.
I'm sorry about this, but I don't think I can stay here anymore. Sorry.
With that parting word, Kim stepped down from the altar. He then ignored Jin Woo's urgent calling and ran towards the door. He stopped and looked for a brief moment just outside the door, but Kim did not step back inside the chamber again. Jin Woo gritted his teeth.
God damn it!
He had saved the lives of others, but what he got in return was definitely not something like gratefulness or friendship. His entire body shuddered from the pain of betrayal. Just as he suspected, as soon as Kim had abandoned them, a gap within the surveillance had been created. It was impossible for 3 people to guard all 4 directions. And so, the statues positioned in the blind spots began creeping closer to the altar. The encirclement of the stone statue was gradually tightening. Song took a look around and then spoke to Jin Woo and Ju Hui.
Both of you should leave now.
His voice was full of resignation. Jin Woo looked at the old man. To watch what happens next, continue to watch along the series and subscribe so you don't miss the next video. If you enjoyed the video, press the like button and comment your feedback. See you in the next video.